What happens when a Hollywood A-lister known for his charm, humor, and unshakable calm walks onto a daytime talk show where one of the hosts is ready for a fight? What happens when a simple promotional interview turns into a clash of values, personalities, and egos that no one, not the producers, not the audience, not even the celebrity himself, saw coming? Before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button for Stage View and like and comment below so you never miss another moment of drama just like this. The studio lights were already scorching when Chris Pratt stepped onto the set of The View. The applause rose like a wave, warm, enthusiastic, almost relieved. The audience loved him, they always had. He had that effortless everyguy charm, the easy smile, the relaxed posture that made people feel like they'd known him for years. Even the camera operators leaned in a little closer. Chris Pratt interviews tended to be fun, lighthearted, full of jokes and unexpected sincerity. But today, something was different. Joy Behar leaned back in her seat, arms folded, an eyebrow arched sharply as she watched him walk in. Her expression wasn't hostile, not yet, but guarded, like she was waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. The producers in the control room exchanged looks. They had seen that expression before. It meant Joy had something on her mind, and she wasn't planning on letting it slide. Chris greeted the panel one by one, cheerful as always, until he reached Joy. She offered a smile that strained at the edges. He felt it immediately, something was off, but he hid his instinctive caution beneath a polite nod. "Joy, always good to see you." "I'm sure," she said, voice clipped, almost playful but with a sharpness under the surface. The live audience chuckled, picking up on the tone. A few leaned forward. They could feel it too. The tension was already snaking through the air like a cold draft. Chris sat down, adjusting the hem of his jacket. Sonny asked the first question, something safe, something easy, about his upcoming film. Chris launched into the story, cracking jokes, getting laughs, warming the room, but even as he spoke, he could feel Joy watching him. Not in the casual host way. Not in the I'm waiting for my turn way. No, she was studying him. Waiting. And he didn't know what for. He wrapped up the anecdote with a laugh, and the audience applauded. But as the sound died down, Joy leaned toward him, eyes narrowed just slightly, and asked, "Chris, do you ever think maybe you use your faith a little too much as a shield?" The room froze. Even the cameras shifted slightly, operators adjusting focus instinctively. Surprise rippled through the audience like a sudden cold wind. Chris blinked, caught completely off guard. "My faith," he echoed. Joy tapped her pen against her note cards. "Yes, you talk about it a lot. Some people say you hide behind it, that you use it to avoid certain questions. Criticisms. Responsibilities." Chris opened his mouth, hesitated, then closed it again. This wasn't on the list of approved questions. This wasn't anywhere near the territory he'd been told they'd cover today. He felt his pulse pick up. He kept his voice soft, steady. "I talk about my faith because it's important to me. I'm not hiding behind anything." Joy raised both eyebrows. "No, because some folks think that's exactly what you're doing." The audience murmured again, low, uncertain, like they weren't sure if they should be entertained or uncomfortable. Chris forced a small smile, the kind he used in interviews when things got awkward. "Well, I can't control what people think. I just try to live my life with honesty." "Honesty," Joy repeated, leaning forward. "Okay, let's talk about honesty." Whoopi glanced at her, warning in her eyes. "Joy." But Joy kept going. "You've been criticized for aligning yourself with certain groups. Organizations. Churches with, let's say, questionable reputations." The word questionable hung in the air like a blade. Chris's fingers tightened around the arm of his chair. He felt the weight of 100 eyes on him. Studio audience, cameras, panelists, producers behind the glass. He breathed in slowly. "I've addressed that before. I'm not part of any organization that discriminates against anyone." Joy shrugged. "Well, you say that, but not everyone's convinced." There it was. The tension finally cracked, not loudly, but sharply enough that everyone felt it. A few audience members shifted uncomfortably. One woman in the front row brought her hand to her chest, eyes wide, whispering to the friend beside her. Chris sat up straighter. His tone changed, not aggressive, not even defensive, just firmer than before. "I'm here to talk about the movie," he said lightly. "But I'm also not going to sit here and let you paint me as something I'm not." Joy's smile widened slightly, almost as if she had been waiting for him to push back. "So you're saying the criticism is wrong?" "Yes," he said. No hesitation now. Completely. Joy leaned back, crossing her legs, tapping her pen again. Well, I guess the viewers can decide for themselves. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was a challenge. But the moment didn't end there. No, this was only the spark. Sarah jumped in quickly, trying to reset the tone. So Chris, tell us about. But Chris held up a hand gently, his gaze still on Joy. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even flustered anymore. He looked resolved. Joy, can I ask you something? He said. Joy blinked, caught off guard for the first time. What? Do you think I'm dishonest? The question silenced the room all over again. You could hear the hum of the lights above. A cameraman whispered something into his headset, his voice trembling with anticipation. Joy chuckled, but the sound didn't land. I think you're selective. Selective? Chris repeated. About what? About what you choose to talk about. What you choose to defend. Chris considered this. Really considered it. His jaw tightened, just a fraction, but his eyes stayed calm. I talk about what matters to me, he said. I defend what matters to me. And I don't see anything wrong with that. Unless what matters to you is being criticized, Joy snapped back. A few gasps popped from the audience. Chris finally exhaled, a slow breath that grounded him. Joy, with all due respect, you don't know me. You don't know my life. And if we're talking about honesty, really talking about it, then we should also talk about assumptions. Joy's eyes narrowed again. What's that supposed to mean? It means you've decided who I am before I even sat down, Chris said. His tone wasn't hostile, just matter of fact, disarmingly so. And that's fine. You're entitled to your opinions. But they're not facts. Sonny glanced between them, wide-eyed. Anna mouthed, "Oh my God," to Sarah. The audience fell dead quiet. And then something unexpected happened. Chris turned away from Joy and looked directly into the nearest camera, breaking the invisible rule every guest instinctively followed. I'm a human being. I make mistakes, I learn, I grow. But I don't hide behind anything. Not my work. Not my personal life. Not my beliefs. And I'm not here to fight anyone. A ripple moved through the audience, shock mixed with admiration. The control room erupted in whispers, producers frantically deciding whether to cut to commercial. But no one could look away. Joy opened her mouth, but Chris gently cut her off. You wanted honesty, he said. That's honesty. Joy's smirk faded. Whoopi finally intervened, her voice steady. All right, let's take a breath. We're having a conversation. That's what we do on this show. But even she couldn't fully diffuse the tension. Chris turned back to the panel, but the energy had shifted drastically. The room felt heavier, charged with an electricity that was both thrilling and unsettling. Chris didn't lean back. He didn't laugh off the moment. He stayed present, focused, grounded in a way that silenced every mocking narrative Joy had tried to imply. But the moment wasn't truly over, not yet. Joy exhaled sharply, almost scoffing. Well, you certainly have a way with words. Chris nodded. I try. Maybe next time, Joy added, her tone light but laced with challenge. You'll try addressing things more directly. Chris smiled, not amused, not offended. Just calm. I thought I did. The audience reacted instantly. Laughter mixed with applause, rising, swelling, building around him like a shield of sound. Joy's eyes flickered, and for the first time, she looked rattled. Whoopi tapped her note cards decisively. We're going to take a quick break. Stick around, folks. But even as the music rose and the lights dimmed slightly for the transition, the air in the studio didn't relax. Not even close. Because everyone, hosts, audience, production crew, knew the break wouldn't be long enough to cool the sparks that had just been lit. And Chris Pratt was far from finished. The break was supposed to last 2 minutes. A standard transition. A moment for the hosts to breathe, for the production team to shuffle notes, for the audience to whisper and exchange theories about what they had just witnessed. But those 2 minutes stretched into something heavier, almost unreal, because no one could stop replaying the confrontation in their heads. Chris remained seated as the stage lights dimmed into their cooler, resting tones. The makeup team approached him quickly, gently patting his forehead, retouching the sides of his face, but even they could feel the tension radiating off him. Not anger, not frustration, simply the steady hum of someone who had just crossed a line he didn't intend to cross, but didn't regret crossing either. Joy didn't move. Her arms stayed folded, her expression tight, her leg bouncing just enough to betray her agitation. She watched Chris out of the corner of her eye, but when he glanced her way, she turned her gaze forward, jaw set. Whoopi muttered something to a producer who leaned down to her chair, nodding intensely. Sunny whispered to Sarah behind her cards, and Sarah's eyes flickered between Joy and Chris like she was watching a snowstorm build. The overhead screens dimmed to black. The on-air N10 cue flashed quietly. Chris inhaled deeply, rolling his shoulders back, as if preparing for a second round he hadn't asked for, but now expected. 3, 2, 1. The lights blasted back into full, bright clarity. The music faded, and the view returned. Whoopi took the lead as always. Welcome back, everyone. We were having a spirited conversation with Chris Pratt, and we're going to continue that, respectfully. It was the kind of line meant to reset the mood. But the audience wasn't convinced. They could feel the leftover storm swirling beneath the table. Chris smiled politely, nodding. Joy didn't. Sunny jumped in quickly, eager to redirect the energy. Chris, before we go anywhere else, I really want to talk about your character in this new film. There's this emotional moment. But Joy cut in, voice deceptively sweet. No, I think we should finish what we started. A few audience members gasped. One person muttered out loud, "Oh boy." Chris glanced at Joy, eyebrows lifting in surprise. Finish what we started? Yes, Joy said, leaning closer, the edge back in her tone. We can talk about the movie later. But you made a few claims before the break that I think deserve some unpacking. Whoopi's head dropped, her hand rising to rub her forehead. Joy. No, really, Joy insisted. You said I've decided who you are. And maybe I have. But don't you think your public behavior contributes to that? Chris crossed one ankle over the other, steady. My public behavior? Yes. Such as? Joy took a breath, long, controlled, dramatic. Let's talk about the events you choose to attend. The people you choose to praise. The organizations you support. You act like you're neutral. I've never said I'm neutral, Chris cut in quietly. The audience fell silent again. Joy blinked at how calmly he interrupted her. Chris continued, I'm a person with beliefs, opinions, flaws. But I'm not hiding anything. I don't pretend to be neutral. Joy opened her mouth, but he kept going, not aggressively, just with a firmness she hadn't expected. And I don't attack people for having different beliefs than me, Chris said. I try to listen, to understand. Joy's jaw tightened. Are you implying I don't listen? Chris held her gaze. Do you? The studio imploded with whispers. A ripple of shock moved through the front row. Even Whoopi straightened in her seat, eyes widening. Joy's smile dropped completely. Wow, she said. Okay. Whoopi saw where this was heading, straight off a cliff. She tried to intervene, but Joy lifted a hand slightly, signaling she wasn't finished. Let me tell you something, Joy said, voice sharp. When someone with your level of influence says things publicly, it matters. It impacts people. It shapes opinions. You can't just shrug and say, oh, I'm being honest. Chris considered her words carefully, then replied with a steadiness that cut through the tension like a knife. I didn't shrug. I took responsibility for my words. You're the one assuming there's something sinister behind them. Joy scoffed. Sinister? That's your word, not mine. But it's the tone you're using, Chris replied. The implication is clear. The audience murmured again. Sarah leaned toward her microphone. Okay, maybe we should shift gears a little because... No, Sarah, Joy snapped, eyes locked on Chris. This is important. Chris leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, voice dropping just enough to command the room. Then let's talk about it honestly. What exactly do you think I'm hiding? That you hide behind your good guy image, Joy fired back. And you get annoyed when anyone challenges you. Chris blinked. Annoyed? I'm not annoyed. Oh, come on, Joy said. You're definitely annoyed. No, Chris said calmly. I'm disappointed. The room froze. Even Joy looked taken aback. Disappointed? Yes, Chris said, his tone warm but unwavering. Because instead of asking questions to understand me, you ask them to trap me, to provoke a reaction. You're not interested in who I am. You're interested in confirming what you already believe. Joy stared at him, completely silent. And the audience felt the shift. He wasn't attacking her. He was humanizing himself. And somehow, that felt more powerful than anger. Whoopi finally spoke, her voice low and even. All right, I think what Chris is trying to say. But now it was Joy who cut in. So you're the victim here? Chris shook his head. I'm not a victim. I'm a guest on your show. And I came here to talk about my work. Joy smirked bitterly. But you love talking about more than work, don't you? You bring up your beliefs all the time. Because they're part of who I am, Chris said. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. What about the people who feel excluded by your beliefs? Joy asked. Chris paused. His brows furrowed gently, not defensively, but thoughtfully. If someone feels excluded by something I've said, then I'd want to understand why. I never want to hurt anyone. Ever. A strange wave moved through the studio, something softer, unexpected. Joy's eyes flickered. For a moment, she wasn't the sharp host. She wasn't the provocateur. She was just uncertain. So, she said quietly, you stand by everything you've said publicly? I stand by what I believe, Chris replied. But I'm always willing to learn. To listen. The simplicity and sincerity of his answer visibly rattled her. Whoopi seized the moment, her voice firm. Good. That sounds like a place to start, not a place to fight. There was a beat, a breath, where it seemed like the tension might finally break. But then Joy spoke again, her voice lower, quieter, but edged with something unresolved. You know what my issue is, Chris? Chris waited. Patient. Open. You smile through everything, Joy said. And people love you for it. But I think sometimes people get away with things because they're charming. A long silence followed. Chris didn't smile now. Instead, he leaned in, voice soft, controlled, and incredibly precise. Charm doesn't excuse anything, he said. Character does. Joy blinked. Once. Twice. He continued. And I try every day to make sure my character matches the way I treat people, on and off camera. The audience broke into applause. Not tentative. Not hesitant. Explosive. Joy looked around, startled by the reaction. She hadn't expected them to side with him so strongly. Chris didn't bask in it. He didn't grin triumphantly. He simply nodded, acknowledging the crowd, then turned back to Joy with a compassion that disarmed even her. You don't have to like me, he said gently, but at least talk to me like you want to understand me. Joy swallowed. Hard. The tension in her face softened, just slightly, but enough for the cameras to catch it. For a moment, she looked almost humanly vulnerable. Then she straightened, trying to regain her footing. Well, that's fair. Whoopi clapped her hands once, loudly. Okay, now we can talk about the movie. The audience laughed. Finally, a release of the pressure that had been building too long. Chris chuckled lightly, but his eyes stayed thoughtful. Joy took a slow sip from her mug, avoiding eye contact. Whoopi continued. So, Chris, about that emotional moment in the third act. But before she could finish, an audience member shouted from the back. We love you, Chris. Laughter and applause erupted. Chris smiled, raising a hand to wave. Thank you. The energy shifted again, lighter, warmer, but beneath the surface, the unresolved crackle between him and Joy lingered. Everyone could feel it. They weren't done. Not really. Sarah leaned in, smiling. Okay, so tell us about filming that big scene on the cliff. Chris launched into the story, animated and charming, giving the audience exactly what they loved about him. Laughter returned. Applause bubbled up naturally. For a moment, it felt like any other Chris Pratt interview. But every now and then, Joy's gaze flicked toward him, studying him again, but with a different lens this time. Not accusatory, not hostile, curious, trying to reconcile the man in front of her with the assumptions she had carried in. And Chris, he didn't avoid her glances. He met them. Steady, patient, unintimidated. The segment was nearing its end. Whoopi prepared to throw to commercial again, but before she could, Joy spoke, soft, almost hesitant. Chris. The entire table looked at her. Chris turned slowly. Yes. Joy's fingers tapped once against her mug. You know, I didn't expect this conversation to go the way it did. Chris gave a small nod. Neither did I. Joy inhaled. You surprised me. A breath caught in the audience. Chris tilted his head. Is that a good thing? Joy hesitated, then said, I'm still deciding. A ripple of laughter passed through the room, softer this time, warmer. Chris nodded thoughtfully. Fair enough. Whoopi grinned, relieved. All right, a little peace at the table. But peace was temporary, because the producers in the control room, hearing the buzz online, seeing the live engagement spike, watching the hashtags form in real time, were about to make a decision that would change everything. They weren't going to end the segment after the break. They were going to extend it. And that was when the real explosion would happen. When the second commercial break hit, the studio felt like a pressure cooker. The applause faded, the music softened, but the oxygen in the room still rippled with the intensity of everything unsaid. Producers whispered frantically through headsets. Assistants darted across the studio floor with new cue cards, and in turn with trembling hands rushed cups of water to the hosts. This wasn't normal. This wasn't planned. This was live television gold and chaos. One of the senior producers leaned into Whoopi's ear just before the break ended. We're extending the segment. Don't cut it. Keep it going. Whoopi stared at him. You're kidding. No. This is blowing up online. Engagement is insane. Keep the conversation flowing. Whoopi sighed, rubbing her forehead. She had been doing live TV long enough to know exactly what that meant. A longer segment meant more room for fire, for landmines, for someone, most likely Joy, to escalate without warning. But she nodded. She understood the game. When the countdown hit 0, the lights flared back into brilliance, the cameras locked in, and the view returned with the tension wound just tighter than before. Whoopi plastered on her performing smile. Welcome back. We're still here with Chris Pratt, who's been giving us a lot to think about today. The audience applauded, some knowingly, some nervously. Chris gave a small wave, shoulders looser now, as if he had settled into the new dynamic. Joy didn't smile at all. She sat stiff, her mug held in both hands like a shield. She looked as if she'd spent the break replaying everything in her mind, fighting an internal battle between doubling down or shifting course. But before anyone could predict what she'd do next, Sarah leaned in. Chris, you were telling us about filming that cliff scene. Chris nodded gratefully, launching into the anecdote again. A story about a stunt gone wrong, a harness that failed to latch properly, the crew panicking while he dangled midair. The audience laughed, gasped, then laughed again. Chris animated the moment with big gestures, sound effects, and a self-deprecating charm that had always made him so beloved. For a moment, the studio felt normal again, light, warm, easy. But when the last laugh landed, Joy exhaled sharply through her nose. A small sound, almost nothing, but it shifted the air. Chris heard it. The audience heard it. The other hosts felt it like a drop in temperature. Something funny? Chris asked gently. Joy shook her head. I find it interesting. Interesting, he repeated. How easily you can move past serious conversations, she said. A few jokes and suddenly everything's fine. The room froze again. Sarah closed her eyes as if silently begging the universe to intervene. Joy continued, You're charming. And the audience loves you. But not everything can be softened with a smile. Chris stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Not defensive. Not annoyed. Thoughtful. You're right, he said. Not everything can be softened. And not everything should be. Joy looked momentarily thrown by his agreement. Chris continued. You want serious? Fine. Let's be serious. The audience collectively leaned forward. Joy blinked. All right. Chris folded his hands on the table. His voice lowered into something quieter. More intimate. More dangerous in its honesty. You think I avoid hard conversations. That I hide behind charm. Or faith. Or good intentions. He paused. But you don't know what my life looks like outside these moments. Joy raised her chin. Then tell us. For the first time, Chris hesitated. Not because he didn't have the words, but because he knew the weight of what he was about to say. Then he breathed in. And he let the curtain drop. Do you know what it feels like, Chris said slowly, to wake up every morning to criticism from people who don't know you? People who make assumptions about you because it's easier than asking questions. The room went silent. Joy didn't blink. Chris continued. Do you know what it's like to see your kids' names trending online because someone misinterpreted something you said in an interview? A murmur passed through the audience, quiet, empathetic, unexpected. Joy's expression softened, only slightly but visibly. Chris's voice grew firmer. I accept criticism when I deserve it. That's part of being in the public eye. That's part of being human. But I don't accept being villainized for things I didn't do. And I don't accept narratives that are built without context. Joy opened her mouth, but Chris held up a hand. Not rudely, not forcefully, just enough to finish his thought. You said I hide behind my image, he said. But maybe the reason you think that is because you've only ever seen the image. Not the person. Joy's lips parted, but no sound came out. The audience was stone still. Then Chris finished softly. I'm not here to win you over. I'm not here to prove anything. I'm here because I was invited. And I showed up honestly. Whoopi let out a long breath. Okay, I think. But Joy finally found her voice. Then why? She asked quietly. Do you only show this side when you're confronted? Sarah whispered under her breath. Oh my God, Joy. Chris didn't flinch. Because you're not asking about the movie right now. You're asking about me. The real me. And when people expect authenticity, that's exactly what I give. Joy looked down, fingers tightening around her mug. For a few seconds, she didn't speak. And the audience started to wonder, was she backing down? Was she actually moved? Had Chris somehow cracked the armor she wore so tightly? But then she lifted her head again, and something darker flickered in her eyes. You know what it sounds like to me? She said slowly, deliberately. Chris waited. It sounds like you're playing the victim, Joy said. The audience gasped. A few even booed. Whoopi sat up straight. Joy. No, Joy said, eyes locked on Chris. You're framing yourself as misunderstood, misjudged, attacked, and maybe you are sometimes. But you also use that narrative to shut down criticism. You use it as a shield. This time, the air didn't crackle. It detonated. Chris stared at her, stunned, not by the accusation itself, but by how deeply unfair it felt. He leaned in, voice low, steady, and razor-sharp in its clarity. You think I'm using my life as a shield? Yes, Joy said, jaw clenched. Chris didn't look angry. He looked disappointed again. Deeply. Painfully. Joy, he said. Calling someone a victim when they're talking about real pain is exactly the kind of thing that keeps people silent. Joy's breath hitched almost imperceptibly. Chris added, I'm not claiming victimhood. I'm saying I'm not made of steel. The audience erupted, not with laughter, not with applause, but with a low hum of agreement, a shared understanding that settled in their chests. Chris continued, I came here to promote my film. And instead, I'm sitting here explaining my humanity. Joy swallowed hard. Her hands trembled slightly. For the first time all episode, she looked unsure. Then Chris said the line that would go viral. If you want to challenge me with facts. With questions, not assumptions. Don't tell me who I am. Ask. The audience erupted into applause so loud it drowned out the host's microphones. It went on and on, cheers, whistles, shouts. Whoopi smiled despite the chaos. All right. The man said what he said. Sunny hid a grin behind her cards. Sarah looked like she was watching the season finale of a drama series. Joy. She stared at Chris, her expression unreadable. Caught between offense, realization, and something almost like respect. The applause went on for nearly 20 seconds. And when it finally died down, Joy spoke, barely above a whisper. Fair point. The room exploded again. Even Chris looked surprised. Joy cleared her throat. Okay. I hear you. Chris nodded, softening. That's all I was asking. Joy looked down at her cards, her shoulders loosening for the first time. Maybe I came in too hot. Whoopi exhaled dramatically. Praise the Lord. The audience laughed. The tension finally broke, cleanly, beautifully. But the story didn't end there. Because while the hosts were ready to move on, the producers had seen something the room hadn't noticed. The extended segment had pushed the schedule. And the next guest, an activist known for strong political opinions, was already backstage, watching the monitors, watching the confrontation, watching the world of social media ignite in real time. And she was furious. Furious at Joy for backing down. Furious at Chris for controlling the narrative. Furious at the audience for cheering. So when she stormed into the producer's corner and said, I want to speak on this. Put me on early. The producers knew exactly what that meant. And they knew exactly what it would cause. Because the fireworks between Chris and Joy were nothing compared to what was coming next. The mood in the studio had finally begun to settle, warm laughter replacing tension, curiosity replacing hostility, when a sudden movement backstage caught the attention of several producers. The next guest, activist Lena Marrow, stood behind the curtain in a tight black blazer and bold red lipstick, arms crossed, expression carved from stone. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't waiting patiently. She was seething. Lena had watched the entire exchange between Chris and Joy on the monitor backstage. She'd watched Joy press him. She'd watched Chris shut down her arguments one by one. She'd watched the audience applaud him, loudly, enthusiastically, loyally. And worst of all, she'd watched Joy soften at the end. Back down. Offer a crack of humility. Lena didn't believe in cracks. Or humility. She believed in confrontation. So when the producers tried to tell her she still had 6 minutes before her segment, Lena shook her head sharply. No, I'm not waiting. I'm addressing that now. One producer blinked. Lena, the schedule is irrelevant, she snapped. Your audience needs perspective. They need balance. And they're not getting it right now. She pushed past him before he could argue. The floor manager's jaw dropped. She's going out. Someone stop her. But Lena was already striding toward the table. The hosts saw her first, Whoopi's eyebrows shot up. Sunny's head jerked toward the stage entrance. Sarah nearly dropped her cards. Joy's face tightened all over again, tension rewriting itself into her shoulders. Chris turned his head slowly, watching as Lena stepped into the bright studio lights, chin high, fire blazing in her eyes. The audience murmured with confusion. They weren't expecting another guest. They weren't expecting this. Lena didn't wait for an introduction. She didn't wait for a cue. She didn't even wait for a chair. She walked right up to the table, planting her hands on the glossy surface. "Hi, Chris," she said, her voice sharp as glass. "I think we need to talk." The room went dead silent. Chris blinked, taken off guard. "Lena, weren't you, scheduled for later?" "Plans change," she said without a smile. "Especially when misinformation is being normalized on national television." The audience gasped. Whoopi's voice boomed across the table. "Whoa, okay. Hold on, Lena. This is not how we do things." But Lena lifted a hand. "With all due respect, Whoopi, sometimes following the rules means letting false narratives stand unchallenged." Chris sat back, arms relaxed, though his eyes had sharpened with alertness. "False narratives?" Lena turned toward him, jaw clenched. "Yes, yours." Joy watched, stiff and silent, torn between letting Lena tear him apart or stepping in to stop the chaos she'd accidentally ignited. "Lena," Whoopi said more firmly, "sit down. We can talk. But we are not ambushing our guests." Lena didn't sit. Instead, she turned, addressing the audience directly. "You're clapping for someone who just spent 15 minutes avoiding responsibility." Boos erupted. Loud ones. Lena didn't flinch. "Chris Pratt," she said, pointing at him like she was leveling a charge in a courtroom, "should not get a round of applause for weaponizing his charm to sidestep accountability." A wave of murmurs rolled across the audience like a cold current. Chris exhaled slowly, folding his hands on the table, eyes steady. "I didn't sidestep anything." Lena arched an eyebrow. "No. So you think what you said was honest?" "Yes," Chris said firmly. "Every word." "Authentic," she pushed. "Yes." "Transparent." "Yes." Lena leaned in, face inches from his. "Then let's test that." The audience oohed like they were watching a verbal boxing match. Chris didn't move. "Go ahead." Lena paced in a small, tight circle, then stopped directly in front of him. "Why?" she said, voice rising. "Should people believe you're not part of exclusionary groups when the people you associate with?" Whoopi slammed her hand on the table. "Lena, you're not doing this. Not like this." But it was too late. The floodgates were open, and Chris was done being cornered. He sat up straighter, voice firm, controlled, but loud enough to cut through Lena's rising anger. "I'm going to say this once," he said. "I don't align myself with any group that promotes hate. Period." Lena opened her mouth, but Chris continued, louder now. "If someone I know says something hurtful or hateful, I address it. Directly. Privately. Personally. Not on camera. Not for applause. Not for headlines." The room fell utterly silent. Chris leaned forward. "And you don't know me well enough to accuse me of anything more than being human." Lena's jaw tightened. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple," Chris said. "I take responsibility for my words. My actions. Not for the actions of every person I've ever stood next to in a photo." That struck something. Hard. A ripple went through the audience. Recognition, agreement, support. Lena scoffed, crossing her arms. "Convenient." Chris stood. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. He simply stood calmly, deliberately. The studio collectively held its breath. He looked down at Lena, not with intimidation, not with anger, but with a kind of calm sadness. "You came out here ready for a fight I didn't pick," he said. "You came out here wanting me to be the villain in your story." Lena's fists clenched. "I wanted you to be honest." "I was," Chris replied. The quiet power in his tone pulled the entire audience forward like a magnet. "And if that honesty doesn't fit the version of me you've already decided on," Chris said, "that's not my responsibility." Lena stared at him, stunned. The audience exploded. Applause. Cheers. Shouts. The roar was immediate and overwhelming. People rose from their seats. The floor managers waved frantically at the control room to lower the mics because the clapping was peaking their audio. Chris didn't smile. He didn't revel in it. He simply sat back down slowly, while the applause washed over him. Lena's expression flickered. Uncertainty, maybe even embarrassment, before she looked away, jaw tight. Joy cleared her throat nervously. "Well, this is definitely something." Whoopi raised both hands. Okay, folks, we're going to bring this down. Let's take a moment. She turned to Chris. I want to thank you for staying calm while we, figure out whatever this was. Lena turned to leave, shoulders rigid, but paused just before exiting. She looked back, not at the audience, not at Whoopi, at Chris. And for the first time since she stormed onto the stage, she looked unsure. Not defeated, not apologetic, just unsure. As if she realized she had walked into a battle she thought she'd already won, only to find out she wasn't fighting the caricature she'd built in her mind. She exited without another word. The hosts exhaled collectively. Sunny let out a nervous laugh. Well, Chris, I think you handled that better than most people would. Chris shook his head. I'm not proud of how tense this got, but I'm not ashamed of defending myself. Whoopi nodded firmly. No one should be ashamed of that. The audience applauded again, gentler this time, genuine, supportive. And finally, the storm began to clear. The aftermath. When the show wrapped, the internet was already on fire. Clips from the confrontation spread like wildfire. Hashtags exploded. Twitter threads unraveled with thousands of comments. Some called Chris a hero. Some criticized Lena's ambush. Some mocked Joy. Some praised Joy for admitting she came in too hot. Memes appeared within minutes. Reaction videos. Breakdowns. Fan edits. People arguing passionately on every social media platform. The View's official channel uploaded the segment, and within 10 minutes it hit 1 million views. By afternoon, 10 million. Producers sat in disbelief. This wasn't just viral. It was historic. Chris, backstage, sat quietly in a private room, his hands still, his mind racing. He hadn't meant for the conversation to become a showdown. He hadn't wanted anyone humiliated. He'd only wanted to be understood. But he also knew something undeniable. He had spoken his truth. Calmly, clearly, and people had heard him. Joy knocked softly on his dressing room door. When Chris opened it, she stood with her arms folded. Not angrily, not defensively, just humbly. Hey, she said quietly. Hey, Chris replied. Joy took a breath. You didn't deserve to be ambushed like that. Chris nodded gently. It's all right. No, Joy said. It's not. She hesitated. And for what it's worth, you handled yourself with dignity. I might not agree with everything you say, but I respect how you said it. Chris smiled softly. Thank you. Joy nodded, then added with a dry smirk. Just don't expect me to go easy on you next time. Wouldn't dream of it, he laughed. She walked off, leaving Chris alone with his thoughts. He exhaled, long, slow, feeling the weight of the entire day settle on his shoulders. Not defeat, not exhaustion, but something strangely grounding. He'd stepped into the storm. He'd walked through it. And somehow he'd come out standing taller. The final narration. By evening, the world had already decided. This wasn't just an interview. This wasn't just a confrontation. This was a moment, a cultural flashpoint, a television wildfire. And Chris Pratt stood right at the center of it. Not because he wanted to be, but because sometimes the truth, raw, unscripted, human truth, demands to be heard. Even when the world wants a villain. Even when the world wants a headline. Even when the world wants someone to blame. Sometimes the moment becomes bigger than the person living it. And this moment, it had only just begun. Final call to action for viewers. Now it's your turn. What do you think about what happened on that set? Did Chris handle it well? Was Joy fair? Was Lena justified or completely out of line? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to know exactly how you see this explosive moment. And before you go, hit subscribe to Stage View and turn on notifications so you never miss another shocking, dramatic Hollywood confrontation brought right to your screen. Because trust me, the next story is already unfolding.